Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Terminally Unique. I am your host, Michael Wooten. If you are returning, welcome. I am very grateful that you're here. If this is your first time with us, welcome. My hope is that through this channel, we have the opportunity to talk about recovery, talk about sobriety, and to help heal family members and individuals living with addiction. I have a sober date of 4/1/21, which means I've been sober a little over 4.5 years, and I'm completely grateful that I finally stopped running and started seeking some answers. If you are out there and you're struggling, please know that this is only my opinion, and there are professionals out there that will be glad to help you. I 100% understand that the process of asking questions is frightening, absolutely frightening, because I was afraid to do it. But questions are the only way we heal. And so in today's episode, we're going to talk about the stages of recovery. In most of our brains, the idea of getting sober just means not using, right? But the moment we stop using, there is a cascade of things that happen chemically within the brain that I didn't know happened. And because I didn't know it happened, it left me subject to the emotions that that cascade created. And thus those emotions always, undoubtedly kept me going back out. So once I learned about the stages, I was able to take that information and then when the emotions arose, do something about it instead of being victim to it. So what are the stages? In the beginning, we have the withdrawal, and then it goes into the honeymoon, then it goes into the wall, and then it goes into adjustment. And then there's some that give also an additional stage where the stage is maintenance and growth. So we'll talk about that later. But first, let's talk about withdrawal. 9 times out of 10, we've all seen a movie where there is an addict or an alcoholic who wants to stop using or stop drinking. And what ends up happening is that they become kind of like this zombified version of themselves, where they are in what looks like chronic pain. They look like they're constantly sweating, they're hurting, they're irritable. That is what we call the withdrawal. So to give a little more light, I am a recovering meth addict. So since 2014 to 2021, I lived in the cloud of the pipe, 24/7, nonstop. And what ended up happening, I'm very grateful that I still have my life today. But what happened when I stopped using was that my dopamine receptors were so overrun that I became tired, lethargic, all of these things. And they say that the withdrawal period can happen like 2 to 3 weeks after using. And so during those 2 to 3 weeks, you just feel like those emotions are going to last forever, literally forever. And so what happens, you don't want to be in that uncomfortable stage forever. So what do? You go back out. I know I'm guilty of it. Very rarely did I ever make it out of the withdrawal period. After the withdrawal, you get into what's known as the honeymoon phase. And this is a very deceptive phase of recovery. I'm very grateful that at the beginning of my honeymoon phase, I was in treatment. And because I was there, when I left the honeymoon phase, I got to do some real work. What is the honeymoon phase? The honeymoon phase is the period of time where the brain, because I've now taken away substance, my brain needs to produce dopamine at an astonishing level to get me back to baseline. What happens is that it produces so much dopamine. I get in this euphoric state of feeling like I'm okay, that feeling like I don't need to go to treatment. What ends up taking place is we avoid doing certain work and we avoid taking care of certain things because now our brain is just on this high. Well, like every honeymoon, it has to come to an end, right? Then arrive in what's known as the wall. And yes, there are days it literally feels like I was beating my head against a wall. So what is the wall? So say you have a baseline of dopamine in the brain, right? So that's represented by this hand, okay? And then you have this, which represents the dopamine levels from using. When I use, my dopamine is all the way up here. like just living in the clouds, right? Then what takes place is after I stop using, my dopamine levels drop and I fall into what's known as withdrawal. So this is the arduous period. Then the honeymoon begins to happen. And so what happens in the honeymoon phase is your dopamine shoots back up here. And so the brain automatically will get to a space where it's like, wait a second, I gotta fix this. So it starts to lower dopamine. So when you're in the wall, what happens is your brain will do this. It will fluctuate dopamine for roughly 6 months. 6 months. During that time, I'm only going to speak from my own experience. During that time where my dopamine was just doing this in the wall, right? There were days when I would wake up and I would feel great. I'd feel fine. I'd be like, okay, let's go tackle the world. Then partway through that day, everything mentally would plummet. And I have zero control over that. I had zero control over that. So what ended up happening was I felt like crap, absolute crap. So I was going up, down. And during that period, I clung tight to my 12-step programming. I clung tight to close friends and family, to my therapists, to my doctors. I'm very grateful that I had a team around me that kept me in some sense of sanity. But during that period, up, down, I could only do one thing. And I know for those of you who are listening, you're not going to be able to see this, but if you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, this chart I made for myself, okay? So I'll help break it down. So this is a April to March 31st calendar for 2021 going into 2022. And I'm not sure if you can exactly see it, but up here in the red, I have the withdrawal period. And then in the orange, I have my honeymoon phase. But then this period here, the yellow, I have as my wall stage. So what I did during this period was every day I would come in, I would put a dot on that day, okay? And what that dot did for me, again, I'm a very tangible person. I have to have physical evidence of something that I'm doing, so that way I know I'm making progress. So I would put a dot. And some days putting this dot up here, super easy. Very proud. There's another dot, right? But in other days, especially during the wall, I'd be like, dang, why? Why am I doing this? The main thing for me was I had to continue putting dots up here because these dots not only represented another day in my life, but they also represented another day where I didn't choose to use. Because by this point, if I went out, it was a choice. And that, I know that's so hard to hear sometimes, but I wanted to choose a better version of myself, not who I had been. So what this chart also did for me, I have, she's kind of like a mother figure in my life. She said some of the greatest words to me during a period of being in my darkest moments. She said to me, Michael, just say, of course you feel like this. What that did for me was in this period of being in the wall, when I would put a dot up there on a day that I felt bad, right? I would just say, of course I feel like this. I'm in the wall, okay? Of course. What that did was that took away any expectation that I needed to be better than where I was at. And that took away that feeling of angst and anxiety that would creep up just because I was in the wall. Like saying the words, of course, allows the emotions to happen, but allows them to move freely without holding on to them. Don't get me wrong, some days were much easier than others, but for the most part, when I had a rough day, I would say, of course, period. That was a tool that worked for me. Well, then after you get through the wall, you get to this blue part down here. And this blue part is what they consider to be the adjustment period. So this is where your brain, after the dopamine's doing this for 6 months, your brain finally gets to a space where it begins to level out. And in that leveling out, what takes place is you begin to get to some semblance of normal and normalcy within your mind. Your life may not look normal. I know mine didn't. Here I am, fresh out of treatment, starting a business, a damaged relationship, having to make amends for things that I only did with the help of a sponsor. So super important. We'll get to all that in another episode. But when I got into the adjustment period, my life didn't look like I wanted it to yet, but of course it wouldn't. I'm still in the first year of my sobriety. But at the same time, I was in a state where I could begin the process of truly beginning to understand who I am and what my baseline is. And one of the most beautiful things about having the team of people around me that I had was that they now began to develop a sense of what my baseline was. So on a day where I would begin to feel off or feel a little quirky, they would just ask gently, everything okay? Everything going well? And from that asking, I began to have a little bit more open reception to letting other people in. So I'm super grateful for that. After the adjustment period, we then get into what some recovery specialists call the maintenance. And the maintenance, again, we'll talk about in a later program, but maintenance is truly just doing the things that worked and continuing to grow through them. I am a product of an incredible community. Not to mention, I'm also the product of every bad thing that has ever happened to me in my addiction and every good thing that has happened to me in my recovery. I can't separate them from my identity. But what I get to do today in my recovery is take the things that I've learned and do my best to be a better version of myself every day. I remember my aunt, who is kind of like my human. I absolutely love this woman, and one day I hope you all can meet her. But she asked me, and this was roughly around 9 months of being sober. She asked me, she goes, Michael, does it ever get tiring? Do you ever get tired always thinking about and wondering about your sobriety and thinking about just having to overthink things, basically, because that's who I had to be for a period. And today, looking back on that, she's absolutely right. I should have been extremely exhausted, but my life depended on it. I was tired, not going to lie. However, I was more afraid of losing the community that started to develop around me and breaking the trust of others that I couldn't afford to go back out. So if it was overthinking that needed to happen, then it needed to happen for an addict like me. Again, there's so many variables. There's so many things that we all bring into recovery that's different from one another. However, at the core root, it's all the same. I did not know how to be Michael Wooten in the world, and I didn't know how to respond to the world or to others, period. So it's through my recovery that I began to remove the external expectations I had on myself and mostly remove expectations I had on other people and allow them to be them and allow me to be me. Today, I have zero expectation on anyone else in the world, period. Because an expectation is just a premeditated resentment, and I choose not to have resentments. But I also have the opportunity to have little tools like this that help me see the growth, see the development, and be able to chart out the life that I want. Even to this day, in my dance studio, on this board right behind me, I keep my sober date going as a means to stay accountable to my students. But every day that I get to change this board out, I remember what it was like writing only 45 days up there. Today, there's 1,741 days up there, and I get to remember who I was then and how much I prayed to have what's up there today and to be the person I am. Again, that's the stages of recovery. We have withdrawal, honeymoon, wall, and adjustment, all of which play a vital part in getting sober, but mostly all of it is just to help us better understand that once we stop using, there's a system to not using, and there's a natural response to the body after you stop. So it's understanding what that natural response is, so that way we don't become victim to the emotions that surround those responses. Once we learn to claim our life and our emotions for our own and be our own responsibility, is the only way that we'll begin to get to the process of healing. So that's all I got today. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. If you like what you're hearing and you want me to continue doing this thing, subscribe, send me to a friend. I don't know. I'm still learning. But I promise I will keep on doing this as long as you guys keep on sharing with me. That's all I got today. I hope you all have a fabulous evening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.